I can't tell if it's really hot in here or if I'm just kind of feeling vulnerable right now, so I'm sorry if I look sweaty. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Steph, and today I want to share 10 of my favorite books. They're in no particular order. I could not possibly rank like 1, 2, 3, 4. It was hard enough to choose 10 books that are actually my favorite as is. Some of these are my favorites because of the time of life that I was in when I connected with them. They showed me or taught me something about the world, or I really resonated with the truth that was in them at the time. And some of them are also my favorites because of how they've stayed with me since that first reading, like how they've affected me afterwards. These are the kind of books that I have returned to again and again and kind of seen something new every single time. I was trying to think about what the common denominator between these books is. Like, why is it that I like these? Why did these books speak to me? And what underlying sort of buttons are they pushing for me? And in the end, one of the most common themes among these books seems to be crazy, unhinged, angry women. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but if you're into that kind of trope, I think you might hear about some books today that hopefully will appeal to you. Welcome to Therapy with Stephanie. Number 1 on my list, but again, not necessarily number 1 my favorite, is The Mime Order by Samantha Shannon. Now, this book is the second in the Bone Season series, and I just love it. This series is intended to be an epic dystopian, and it's about people with clairvoyant abilities. Actually, I think that it is supposed to be a divergent history, so it's our world, but London and certain areas of the world are now dictated by this regime called Scion, and they are very anti-clairvoyant. Of course, our main character, Paige, is a girl who has kind of an unusual gift. She's a dream walker. That means that her sort of spirit can leave her body, and through the series we see her develop that gift quite a lot. But the second book is particularly special to me, again, because it's primarily set in London. You get a lot of that London underworld, kind of grimy, conniving, backstabbing stuff, but you also really first begin to get a sense of the epic scale of the story. The first book is really, it starts a bit smaller and a bit more contained. It is Oxford, but yeah, the second one is definitely, we see Paige develop a lot more, and that's where like the direction of the book really gets quite exciting for me. Number 2 on this list is The Secret History. But The Secret History is one that the time and place that I read it was so important to my love for that book. The book is about a young man named Richard who goes to a really exclusive university. I myself was about to go to university for the first time, and I was also a first-gen university student. And so I found his experience very interesting, and I often kind of reflected back on it when I was in university, thinking about things like power and privilege and charisma. This guy, Richard, he makes friends with this sort of exclusive group and gets in with this teacher who teaches only this like really quite eccentric group of people. And we find out very early in the book that one of these students has been murdered. It's a why done it kind of book. And so the book kind of builds on all of these things until it really comes to that climax. Those first moments of reading it, I was just hooked from the beginning. And even still, I reread some of it the other day, and oh my God, I want to reread the whole book again, I think, at some point, because it begins with this line, "This is the only story I'll ever be able to tell," or something like that. Everything about it, the twist, the themes of power and charisma and how they can kind of be abused and how people can be manipulative, and the dark ends to which people are willing to take some things was just so enthralling. It's definitely a much slower story. If you're looking for a really fast-paced thriller, maybe you would do better to watch like How to Get Away with Murder or something like that, rather than this book. But if you're looking for something that's like really atmospheric and going to slowly build suspense, then this is definitely the book for you. I actually just got this copy and it is of Persuasion. I don't know if this is focusing, I don't think it is. Anyways, Persuasion by Jane Austen. And this one is, in my opinion, the most romantic romance book ever. I never really had a great appreciation for second chance romance, but I think now that I'm married, I do. I appreciate the romance and the development of the characters a lot more, and it just kind of makes me love this book to an even greater degree. But I have really loved this one since I was a teenager. I love being in the mind of Anne, who is this, I think she's actually my age, like later 20s, sort of spinster woman who's kind of so old now she's unmarriable, and a guy that she was deeply in love with and persuaded to turn down because of his lack of money and social status now returns, and he's, you know, fucking loaded, and everybody respects him, he's super hot and all of this. It's just kind of their story of reconciling and going through the emotional disappointments and struggles of that past rejection, and understanding the people that they are now, that I think it's like 7 years has passed or something like that, quite some time. I love the tension and the bitterness of Anne. This is I think our first unlikable kind of female character. And I'm gonna go on a tiny rant right now about the recent Netflix adaptation. I hated it, it was horrible, not just because they completely butchered some of the most famous lines, but they changed the personality of Anne so much that she was really not recognizable. And it took away from her as a character, because she's kind of bitter, she's kind of lonely, and she loves her family, but there is a much more complicated and sometimes a very negative relationship there that she's kind of wrestling with all the time. And she's not always likable in the way that some of the other heroines are that Austen has written, and that a lot of sort of rom-com people are. And I just think that it's such an important and interesting story to see her start off, especially in that particularly negative place, and come through to reconcile some of her negative emotions with her family and deal with and address some of that. I really love and appreciate when a female character is unlikable in the beginning because she has some shit she needs to deal with, and maybe never becomes fully likable, but you actually see some character development. My favorite adaptation is, I think it was 2007 or 2008 with Sally Hopkins. So good. And the letter scene in that one is just so romantic. There's so many good parts in this book, but that letter, it will forever reign in my mind as the most romantic few lines. Yeah. Okay, I had to put my hair up because the humidity is building to an epic tropical storm. Number 4 on my list is The Girl Who Played with Fire, but I'm kind of cheating with this one because I actually want to talk about the entire series, but again, the second book is my favorite because the whole series I have very personal and very complicated feelings about, and I'm not going to share all of them, but I've decided to cheat a little bit by including the second book in the series so I can kind of talk about the whole series, because you should read the whole series and you kind of have to if you want to read the second book. The series is about Elizabeth Salander primarily, and she is kind of a social outcast. She's a ward of the state. She basically assists a reporter, Mikhail Bloomkist or something. In the first book, they solve a mystery involving missing girls and a specific missing woman. But in the second book, the series expands. It's still kind of a detective novel, but there is a lot more going on. And it's the first book where you begin to realize that the author kind of tricked you by luring you in with this excellent, beautifully, masterfully crafted mystery novel, but actually the series is about something much, much more. It is, again, about power and who our society chooses to trust and to protect, because Elizabeth is kind of alienated and an outsider from a lot of society. She hasn't been protected by the government or by the social justice system, and it's left her vulnerable to a lot of different things, and we get to know her character a lot more in the second book. I think that discussion around society and who falls through the cracks and who is seen as valid really made me appreciate in this series that really changed how I thought about genre fiction in general. When I read it, I was sort of, I think, in my teens, and still kind of in a place where I thought like literary fiction trumps all, and really felt superior because I read like fucking Moby Dick. This book really made me realize that genre fiction presents something just as valuable and can just as effectively critique society and societal norms as literary fiction can, and sometimes even more effectively, I think. I think this series is really widely loved. I would say if you haven't finished it, you should finish the series. It really changes a lot in tone and story. It becomes extremely dimensional and interesting. And I think just anyone who's interested in, honestly, the political or legal systems, or who just wants like a really good thriller novel, would probably really enjoy this book. In a similar vein, I love Ninth House. I think this is number 5 on my list. I think you can definitely hear that. That is thunder. It's adding to the mood, the magical, dark energy of this book. So this book, I've said before in my review of Hellbent, kind of the main character, Galaxy, or Alex Stern, reminds me a lot of Lisbeth Salander from the Millennium series, because she's kind of edgy. She's a survivor type of character who will really do whatever is necessary, especially unconventional thing. And again, as an example of someone who is not necessarily part of a demographic that is protected. This book in some ways takes really similar arguments to the Millennium series, except that it brings it into academia, which I love. I read this kind of at the end of my academic. Bardugo is so clever in how she uses magic as a metaphor for power in this series. So if you don't already know, this one is about a girl who is kind of working as like she's working kind of like as a regulatory body within the secret societies of Yale, and keeping an eye on the type of magic they practice. And she has a lot of secrets, a lot of baggage that comes really relevant to the main plot, kind of like how Lisbeth Salander does. It's kind of a detective type story again. There's something kind of funny going on, somebody's dying, there's ghosts, a lot of really cool, great ideas that are in this book, and I think like some of the core arguments in it as well are really important. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is a sort of gothic, very fairy tale-esque story, and I would not recommend this one to just anybody because there are a lot of trigger warnings. So before you go and pick it up, do check those trigger warnings, respect your own boundaries and needs, but I personally love it, and that is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. When I first read this book, I didn't think that it was going to be a favorite. I think I rated it 4 stars, but it is one of those stories that, as I have been thinking about it, and as time has gone on, I've reflected on it more and more. But now I have so much respect and appreciation for what the author is doing, because I think she actually did something really interesting and really important with this book. To me, this book is fundamentally about trauma. It is a very loose retelling of the Juniper Tree fairy tale, and very loose. And so it follows 3 sisters, and our main girl, it's written from a first-person perspective. Her name is Marlin Chen. I've never said that out loud. She is sort of like a witch with some powers. All 3 of her sisters are, and they live with her. They live with their father, who is a wizard, and people in the town come and like pay him for like magical favors. This is set in sort of an analog to historical Russia. It's not specific about the time. The story really begins to take off when Marlin Chen has her first sort of taste of freedom, because their father kind of keeps them locked away a little bit. They don't go out into the town, but she sneaks out with her sisters and goes to this ballet. In some ways, the plot is a little bit slower moving. There is like a murder mystery kind of thing going on. There's attacks happening throughout the city, but that really takes the backseat to a lot of the character work. This is the kind of book that really combines sex and violence in a way that I find is interesting, but I know that a lot of people do not enjoy. Female characters in this book are not likable. They're all, none of them I think are really likable. The main girl is sort of almost inexcusably naive and sort of pathetic and a little bit weak, and has a lot of emotional issues that later I think you begin to understand is her internalizing some incredibly traumatic things that have happened to her. As that unfolds, it can be disturbing for some people. I think Ava Reid actually has a really wonderful and intimate understanding of the Gothic genre and is not really afraid to put all of it on the page. I like this book because of the conversation around trauma that it is having, and that the women are not necessarily likable. Their expressions of sort of female rage are not campy, and I don't know how to really explain it, but you know, like sometimes there's like this depiction of female rage and you're like, yeah, go girl, crush the patriarchy. This is not that. It is hurt people who are hurting other people. This book is not a cozy read. Sometimes you are so close with the main character who is going through things and thinking about things that it's like wearing a skin suit. It is not always comfortable, and at the same time as being fascinated and touched by her character and what's going on, you also kind of want to take the skin suit off. Like you just don't, it's gross in some parts. And I know that some people feel like it is too much, but to me this is a very honest book about what the reality of surviving quieter forms of violence, whether it is childhood sexual assault or domestic violence, things that are normally hidden and that you're supposed to be kind of quiet about. It's very honest about the impact of some of those things. I think that it has lingered with me more than any other book about trauma that I've ever read. So again, check the trigger warnings. This one may not be for you, but it was definitely the book for me. So, and number 7 on our unlikable women book list. So this one is Wuthering Heights. Again, I love my current edition here. I think it's so pretty. Okay, bragging over. I know that a lot of people who read this book describe this as a love story, and for me, this is not a love story. Certainly there is love in it. Actually, the book is about 2 love stories, and the core sort of theme or argument in the book is not about romance, it's about revenge and bitterness and Heathcliff's festering, ugly mind. It follows 2 timelines, and it is super fucking confusing if you don't know what you're getting into. So let me tell you. So this book is about Kathy and Kathy. One is Kathy and Heathcliff. She is Kathy the elder, Catherine, and she's usually the one that people are talking about when they're talking about Wuthering Heights. The second timeline is Kathy the younger. That's Kathy or Catherine's daughter. So the woman who is like kind of obsessed with Heathcliff has a daughter named Kathy, and she also has a romance. So there's 2 timelines that we are kind of following. What's interesting for me is the story is really the parallel between the mother and the daughter's lives and their relationships, and how they're similar and how they're different, and how the way that we operate in our relationships has such a huge impact on the outcome. But like I said, I don't think that this is at its core a love story. This is at its core for me a revenge story about Heathcliff, maybe because I'm obsessed with Heathcliff, that could be why, and his obsession and his bitterness against individuals in his life and class structure, how he takes that out on the younger generation. I think that different people take different things out of it. If you've read it, I would love to hear what your thoughts are. So that one is Wuthering Heights. I think everyone should read it. No offense to anybody, but it's way better than Jane Eyre. The next book that I love is Frankenstein. I've always really loved this book, but I think in the last couple of years I've come to appreciate it in a very different way. I first read it when I was coming into my teens, and I identified a lot with themes of like loneliness and alienation. Appreciate and find it very interesting how Mary Shelley was so self-aware about mental health issues and loneliness. Sorry, that's my cat. He meows to me. It's an automatic meow back to him. Hey, do you want to say hi? Come here. No, he's just gonna lay underneath the coffee table for now. So, and it just really blows my mind that she was so young when she wrote it. So I think I'm kind of continually unpacking this book as I age. There's just so many layers of complexity, how she makes you feel so sad and compassionate sort of to the creature that is supposed to be the monster in this. And Mary Shelley really forces you to question, who is the monster? Who is actually responsible for some of the terrible things that happen in this book? But yeah, the story is about Dr. Frankenstein. He's the scientist bloke in it, and he creates the monster who is unnamed in the whole book and is kind of horrified at like what he's done, and he flees in this creature, and really it just wants affection. So you could say that this book is about daddy issues. I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear. And I guess that quote really just sort of embodies the whole attitude or feeling of the monster in this. Classic gothic, classic sci-fi, great read, recommended to absolutely everybody. Up next we have our last sort of unlikable, nasty woman, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And I love this book. I have so many memories associated with this book. I read it for the first time when I was in India. I was in Darjeeling with my friend, and we needed to find some kind of book that we could read on the 31-hour train ride home, or not home, but to the airport. And I was young and broke, and so Rebecca was something that I could actually afford that was in English. So I had no idea what it was. I picked it up and I read it. I will always remember like laying on the top bunk of this creaky train as it broke down, trying not to use the washroom on the train because it was disgusting, and reading Rebecca. I don't have my copy here. I wish that I did, but I still have the price tag. I think it was like 300 rupees, which is like, I don't know, it's like $6. It's about a young woman who's never named in the book. She is a lady's companion to this sort of older woman that is sort of irritating, and she ends up meeting and marrying this man who is recently widowed named Mr. De Winter. Hello. And they get married very, very quickly after first meeting, and she goes to his home, Manderley, which is one of those houses that we have as characters, and she's kind of haunted by all of these echoes of his dead wife, who seems like the perfect woman, and especially the housekeeper was particularly and sort of weirdly obsessed with Rebecca. As you may guess, this is super gothic. It's very uncanny. There's sort of this fog that is Rebecca hanging over this house that they live in. The main character is very young. She gets in her head. It's her, in some ways, first experience of jealousy or of obsession with this woman. At its core, I would say this is a mystery book that deals with identity. It does, for me, have a fairly ambiguous ending that is very satisfying as well. I don't know, if I had to say I have one absolute favorite book, I might say it's Rebecca. I've definitely said that in the past. But I might say it's Rebecca because this is the book I think that I reread the most often. I usually read it once a year. And I think every time that I read this book, I experience something different or have a different insight into it. That is Rebecca, again, one that I think pretty much everybody should read. Last one, American Gods by Neil Gaiman. This was the first Neil Gaiman book that I think I read, was it? Yeah, this was the first Neil Gaiman book that I read. It follows a man named Shadow. And Shadow is in prison. He's getting out of prison a few days early because his wife and his best friend have died in an accident, and he's going to go to their funeral. So on the plane back home, he meets a man named Wednesday, who seems to know quite a bit about him and offers him a job. Some stuff happens, some reveals happen, and then he takes the job with this man Wednesday, who is coded as Odin, But they go for this big epic road trip, and Mr. Wednesday is visiting all of his friends, which are all gods. So the core sort of story or problem for this book is that the old gods, like Odin, like there's a lot of like Slavic gods, and like Egyptian gods, are feeling forgotten by their followers and being replaced by new gods like media. My only critique with this is that I do remember it being a fairly male-dominated story. There are a few very memorable female characters, but at the same time, I think it is, to an extent, a piece of its time. Like, doesn't mean it's not a good book. This one has a very interesting sort of combination of Gaiman's like very classically English, beautiful prose and storytelling in almost a very fairy tale-esque way, combined with a very American backdrop, like going on this road trip throughout the states and encountering people and things and stuff happening, and ugh. I really love it. I think this one really made me think differently about what we give our time to, gods in society. It's a really great book. It's a beautiful book. I love it. So those are my top 10 favorites. As I was putting together this list, I kept thinking of this quote by Neil Gaiman, and it was something like, "Fiction is the lie that tells the truth." All of these books made it onto this list because in some way they are telling a truth that I identify or resonate with, either at a time in my life or that has become increasingly meaningful, or a theme that I have increasingly identified with. I have to stop saying as I age, but as I get older, I'm so old, guys, I'm so old. But there's been something very meaningful and very interesting on a personal level, in addition to being just a beautifully, wonderfully told story, an interesting story. All of these books have revealed something about either myself or society, or about literature and books as a whole and what they actually are offering to people and to me. As always, I would absolutely love to hear about your favorite books. What ones do you love? Why do you love them? And if you know of any books that might become my new favorite, please do tell me in the comments. Thanks a lot. I'll see you guys later. Bye.